Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey not into battle or into the brutal lives of medieval peasants, but into a place of quiet, scholarly reverence. We're going to wander through the hushed, papyrus-filled halls of the most famous library in the ancient world, the Great Library of Alexandria. You are a keeper of scrolls, an everyday hero tasked with preserving the accumulated knowledge of humanity. The truth is, you probably wouldn't last a single day. One misplaced scroll could throw an entire section into chaos. And earning a stern, disappointed sigh from the head librarian was a fate more terrifying than any curse a pharaoh could dream up. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you retuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air inside the Great Library is cool, a welcome relief from the relentless Egyptian sun. Sunlight streams in from high, narrow windows, illuminating dust motes that dance like tiny, golden spirits in the still air. The scent here is unlike anywhere else in the world adry. Sweet perfume of aging papyrus, the sharp, clean smell of cedarwood from the shelves, and a faint, lingering hint of ink. You walk barefoot across smooth marble floors, the stone cool against the soles of your feet. All around you, rising from floor to ceiling, are the bibliothecae, thousands upon thousands of wooden pigeonholes, each one cradling a precious scroll. This is your first day. You are no longer just a student. You are a junior librarian, a guardian of these fragile vessels of thought. Your mentor, a kind but serious man named Ctesibius, leads you to a small wooden desk in a quiet alcove. He places before you a simple set of tools, a reed pen, freshly sharpened to a fine point, a small stone pot filled with black ink made from soot and gum arabic, and a long, blank strip of papyrus. This will be your catalog, your inventory log, your sacred duty. Your task is not to read for pleasure, Ctesibius whispers, his voice a dry rustle like turning pages. It is to know, to record, to order. You are a shepherd, and these scrolls are your flock. You must know each one, where it belongs, and what song it sings. He gestures to a nearby trolley where a single scroll waits. It is your first charge. It feels impossibly heavy in your hands, not from its physical weight, but from the weight of its contents. This is your life now, here in the Museum, the great institution of learning dedicated to the Muses, of which the library is the heart. You've heard the stories of the senior scholars who live here, their every need provided for by the royal treasury, free lodging, tax-free stipends, and communal meals, all so they can dedicate their entire lives to knowledge. You wonder if you will ever earn such a privilege. You carry the scroll to your desk. It's bound with a simple leather tie. Attached is a small clay tag, a syllabus, with a single word scratched into it, stoicheia, the elements. You gently untie the leather strap and lay the scroll down. With careful, reverent fingers, you begin to unroll it. The sound is a soft, delicate crinkle, a sound you will come to associate with the very act of discovery. The papyrus is smooth but fibrous, the black ink of the scribe's careful hand still sharp and clear after all these years. You dip your reed pen into the ink pot. The soft scratch of the nib on your own papyrus strip is the only sound in your small corner of this vast universe of words. Your task begins. You are not just a librarian. You are a cataloger, and this is your whispered inventory. Historians of the future will argue over how many scrolls truly lived here. Was it 40,000? 400,000? The exact number is lost to time, a ghost of a statistic. But to you, on your first day, the number feels like infinity. And it begins with one. You write down the title, the author, a man named Euclid, and its general subject. You note its condition, the quality of the papyrus, the neatness of the scribe's hand. Each detail is a small act of preservation. You are connecting the past to the present, ensuring this fragile piece of knowledge will find its way to the scholars of the future. You are a link in a chain that you pray will never be broken. The scroll is titled Stoicheia, the Elements. As you unroll it further, the neat columns of Greek text flow past, interspersed with diagrams of an almost divine precision. This is the work of Euclid, a name spoken with a quiet reverence in the halls of the Musang. You are looking at the foundation of geometry, the logical bedrock upon which so much of the world's understanding is built. The first section begins with definitions, simple and yet monumental. A point is that which has no part. A line is breadthless length. You read them softly, your whisper a tiny sound in the vast silence. Each statement is a perfect, unshakable truth. It's certainly more reliable than the pronouncements of the temple oracles, whose predictions seemed to change depending on what they had for lunch. Your mentor, Ctesibius, had told you that the library's mission was to replace superstition with knowledge, to build a world on axioms and proofs rather than on the whims of capricious gods. Looking at Euclid's work, you understand. Here, there are no opinions, no maybes. There is only what can be proven, step by logical step. You run your finger gently over a diagram illustrating two parallel lines. They will never meet, no matter how far they are extended into the vastness of the papyrus. It is a certainty, a comfort in a world of chaos. You continue to unroll the scroll, your reed pen scratching away on your own inventory log. You note the author, Euclid of Alexandria. You note the subject, geometry. You then begin to list the contents, the 13 books contained within this masterpiece. As you get to the middle of the first book, you pause at Proposition 5. The diagram is an isosceles triangle, with several lines extending from its base. You've heard the senior students laughing about this one. They call it the Pons Asinorum, the Bridge of Asses. It is considered the first significant intellectual hurdle in the study of geometry. Any student who cannot grasp its proof is deemed an ass, unable to cross the bridge into the more complex territories of the mind that lie beyond. You can almost picture a long line of frustrated young men, all stuck on this one triangle, unable to proceed. You carefully roll the scroll further, the papyrus making a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. The logic is relentless. If this is true, then this must be true. There's no room for debate. Trying to argue with one of Euclid's proofs would be like trying to argue with a tide or a season. You could try, but you would only end up looking foolish and slightly damp. The elegance of it is breathtaking. Historians still argue whether Euclid was a single individual or a collective of mathematicians working under one name, compiling generations of knowledge into a single cohesive work. Looking at the unwavering consistency of the logic, the singular, focused voice, you find it hard to believe it was the work of a committee. A committee, you suspect, would have argued for 3 years about the definition of a point and ended up with 6 different kinds of triangles, 2 of which would be useless. You make a note on the physical condition of the scroll. Papyrus of high quality, likely from the Nile Delta. Ink is bold with minimal fading. Some of the more complex diagrams in the later books are dense, almost resembling a cat that has walked through an ink pot. You smile at your small, private joke. Your duty is to be precise, but a little bit of character in the logs can't hurt. It shows you are paying attention. You carefully, slowly begin to roll the scroll back to its beginning. The process is a meditation in itself. The edges must align perfectly. One careless movement could cause a tear or a crease that could last for centuries. Your hands are steady, your movements deliberate. The scroll becomes a tight cylinder once more. You wrap the leather tie around its middle and fasten it, tucking the small clay syllables back into place. Your first task is complete. You have cataloged one scroll. You have touched one small piece of the world's wisdom, recorded its existence, and ensured it can be found again. You carry it to a different shelf, one marked for items to be reshelved by the senior librarians. A sense of quiet accomplishment settles over you. It's a small feeling in this vast, echoing space, but it feels as solid and real as the marble floor beneath your feet. You look over at the trolley. Another scroll is waiting. You return to the trolley. The next scroll looks and feels different. The leather tie is softer, dyed a faint purple, the color of royalty. The clay syllabus is smaller, more elegant, with a title that is not as straightforward as the last. Wonder Critica Regia, the royal art of dream judgment. You carry it to your desk with a sense of curiosity. This is not the clean, hard world of mathematics. This is something else entirely. Something softer, murkier, and far more human. As you unroll it, the papyrus feels thinner, almost delicate. The handwriting is not the neat, precise script of a professional scholar, but a more flamboyant, looping scrawl, as if the author was in a great hurry to get his thoughts down. The author is listed as one Artemidorus of Daldis, a name you have not heard before. The work is a treatise, a guide to interpreting the dreams of kings. Immediately, you understand its importance. The health and stability of the entire kingdom of Egypt under the Ptolemies rests on the shoulders of one man, the king. And his state of mind, his fears, his hopes, all of which play out in the theater of his sleep, are matters of national security. You begin to catalog the contents, and you can't help but be drawn in. The text is a fascinating mix of psychology, superstition, and surprisingly shrewd political advice. If a king dreams of a lion with the head of a goat, one passage reads, it signifies a trusted advisor who speaks with the voice of a fool. He should be watched. Another entry is more mundane. To dream of a goose is to anticipate a visit from a talkative relative. Prepare wine, but hide the good silver. You permit yourself a small, silent smile. Even in the rarefied air of the royal palace, it seems, annoying relatives are a universal constant. The scroll is filled with these pronouncements, some profound, some profoundly strange. If your teeth fall out in a dream, you will lose a valuable possession. If you catch them, you will recover it. You make a note in your log, a practical guide, though its premises are speculative. This was the kind of knowledge that coexisted with the rigorous logic of Euclid and the astronomical calculations of Aristarchus. The Great Library's purpose, you realize, was not to judge knowledge, but to collect it all. It was a repository for every facet of the human mind, from the brilliantly logical to the deeply superstitious. Historians still argue about the extent to which these dream interpretations influenced actual state policy. Did a Ptolemy ever truly cancel a military campaign because he dreamed he was being chased by a particularly angry fig? It seems unlikely, and yet you can imagine a nervous court official having received this very scroll from the library, trying to gently persuade the king that his dream of flying wasn't a sign of his impending godhood, but perhaps just a result of the questionable fish he'd had for dinner. The scroll even contains a section on forbidden dreams, those that should never be spoken aloud, as their telling alone could bring about misfortune. It is a sobering thought that the most powerful man in the known world might be terrified into inaction by a shadow that flickered through his mind in the dead of night. This is a far cry from the Bridge of Asses. There's no proof here, no unshakable logic. There's only symbolism and fear. You note a small, faded stain near the edge of the papyrus. It looks like a drop of wine. This was a working document, something read late at night in a lamplit room, perhaps by a nervous servant or even the king himself. It was a tool, just as Euclid's work was a tool, but for navigating a different kind of world, the treacherous, unpredictable landscape of the human soul. This was one of the quirkiest facts about your new home. For all its devotion to reason, the library also served as a resource for the deeply irrational fears of the powerful. You carefully finish your entry, author Artemidorus. Subject, a niromancy with specific application to royalty, condition well used with minor wine stains. Scribe's hand is spirited if somewhat chaotic. Seems less like a scholarly text and more like an emergency guide for a very specific and very nervous kind of reader. You roll the delicate papyrus back into a tight cylinder, your fingers moving with practiced ease. You secure the purple-dyed tie and place the scroll next to Euclid's on the return cart. 2 scrolls cataloged, 2 wildly different worlds. One of perfect angles and irrefutable proofs, the other phantom geese and anxious kings. And you, the quiet keeper, are the bridge between them. As you place the dream scroll beside Euclid's, a low, resonant chime echoes from the central courtyard of the Musang. It is the call for the midday meal. Your stomach gives a small, hopeful rumble, a gentle reminder that while your mind may feast on knowledge, your body has more practical needs. You glance up from your quiet alcove and watch as a few of the senior scholars begin to drift from their studies, moving with the unhurried gait of men who have never had to rush for a meal in their lives. You see one of them, a famous anatomist named Eratosthenes, pause to look out a window. He is a thick-set man, his robes fine, his face placid and well-fed. He is one of the fortunate few who truly lives within these walls. He is a member of the Musang, the great scholarly institution established by Ptolemy himself. This is the fact that fuels the dreams of every junior librarian like you. Once you ascend to the rank of a senior scholar, you are cared for life. The royal treasury provides a generous stipend, a salary that allows for a comfortable existence. You receive free lodging within the Musang complex, and your meals are served in a grand communal hall. And most coveted of all, you're exempt from taxes. A privilege so profound it's almost mythical. You suspect that even the most stoic philosopher would crack a smile at the thought of a tax-free life. This was the genius of the early Ptolemaic kings. They understood that to attract the greatest minds from across the Greek-speaking world, from Athens, Rhodes, and beyond, they needed to offer more than just access to scrolls. They needed to offer a sanctuary, an environment where intellectual pursuit was the only required labor. Here, a poet wouldn't have to worry about the price of bread, and a mathematician wouldn't have to waste his time haggling in the marketplace. Their genius was a resource for the kingdom, and it was to be protected and nurtured. But as you watch Eratosthenes turn from the window, his expression unreadable, you recall a cynical line from the visiting poet Timon of Phlius. He once described the scholars of the Musang as well-fattened birds in a cage, scribbling endlessly and squabbling with each other. A golden cage, to be sure, but a cage nonetheless. The royal patronage was not without its price. The scholars were expected to produce, to bring glory to Alexandria and the Ptolemaic dynasty. They were engaged in a constant, quiet competition for royal favor, for research funds, for prestige. The air in the common hall, you've heard, is thick with unspoken rivalries and academic jealousies that would make a nest of vipers seem like a gathering of old friends. Historians still argue about the true nature of this place. Was the Musang a university in the modern sense, dedicated to pure knowledge for its own sake? Or was it more of a royal think tank, a machine for generating the kind of cultural and scientific prestige that could be weaponized as political power? Was your work in service to the muses, the goddesses of the arts and sciences, or was it ultimately in service to Ptolemy, the king who saw knowledge as another tool of statecraft? You look at the endless rows of scrolls, each one a universe of thought. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps that was the necessary compromise. You, of course, do not yet have these privileges. As a junior librarian, you're given a small living allowance, enough for a simple room in the city and a diet that consists mostly of bread, olives, and the occasional fish. You are not yet a bird in the cage. You are still one of the sparrows pecking at the crumbs outside. Your work is your audition. Every scroll you catalog, Every neat entry in your log is a step towards that life of security. It is a powerful motivator. The promise of a life without taxes is enough to make a man catalog the entire history of pottery without a single complaint. The midday chime fades, leaving the hall to its deep, humming silence. Your own meal will have to wait. There is still work to be done. You turn your gaze back to the trolley. A new scroll awaits, its clay tag promising another journey into another mind. Your hunger is a small, manageable thing. The hunger for knowledge, the hunger for a place among the scholars, that is the fire that truly drives you. You reach for the next scroll. The quiet, crinkling sound of the papyrus is the only answer to the silent rumble in your stomach. Word count 1083, awaiting continue. The next scroll on the trolley feels heavier, more substantial than the others. The papyrus is thick, the wooden end caps, the umbilicus, are made of a darker, polished wood. The title on the syllabus is a single provocative word, Puriphysios, on nature. The author is listed as Epicurus of Samos. You feel a small thrill of something like danger as you carry it to your desk. This is not a text on harmless triangles or even royal anxieties. This is philosophy, and a controversial one at that. You've heard the whispers and the heated debates among the senior scholars in the courtyard. Epicurus and his followers were seen by many as radical, even dangerous. While other philosophers spoke of divine creators and the immortal soul, Epicurus taught a different story. As you carefully unroll the scroll, the dense Greek text seems to challenge the very air around it. You begin to catalog its core tenets, your pen scratching softly. The scroll argues that the universe is composed of nothing but atoms, tiny, indivisible particles moving through the void. There is no divine plan, no grand architect. Everything from the stars in the sky to the thoughts in your own head is the result of the random collisions and combinations of these atoms. It's a stark, godless vision of the cosmos. It's the kind of idea that could get you some very unfriendly glares at the temple, and probably a lecture on piety from your grandmother. Even more controversially, the scroll dismisses the idea of an afterlife. The soul, it argues, is just another collection of atoms, a temporary arrangement that dissolves back into the void upon death. Death is nothing to us, you read in a whispered breath. For when we exist, death is not present. And when death is present, we do not exist. It is a chillingly logical thought. It sweeps away centuries of myth and religious comfort in a single, elegant sentence. There is no underworld, no judgment, no Elysian fields. There is only this life. This is the kind of material that made the great library both a sanctuary and a battlefield. It housed not just accepted wisdom, but ideas that pushed at the very boundaries of what was considered acceptable thought. You can picture two scholars arguing furiously over this very scroll, one defending the traditional reverence for the gods, the other championing Epicurus's cold, atomic reality. It would be a debate with no easy answers, fueled by strong wine and even stronger opinions. No doubt it would end with one of them storming off to write a scathing 6-volume refutation, which the library would then, of course, dutifully catalog as well. The scroll goes on to argue that the goal of life is not to please the gods or to achieve glory, but simply to attain a state of ataraxia, a profound peace of mind, free from fear and anxiety. The path to this peace, Epicurus writes, is through the pursuit of simple pleasures, the cultivation of friendships, and the avoidance of pain. It sounds surprisingly gentle for such a radical worldview. He wasn't advocating for wild, hedonistic parties, as his critics often claimed. In fact, he argued that the most reliable pleasures were the simplest: a good conversation, a piece of bread, and cheese shared with a friend, a moment of quiet contemplation. It was a philosophy for a quiet life, not a scandalous one. Historians still debate the true influence of Epicureanism in the ancient world. Was it a fringe movement for a few disaffected intellectuals? Or did its ideas resonate more widely with ordinary people seeking solace from the harsh realities of life and the fear of death? Looking at the well-worn edges of this scroll, you suspect it was read often. It was a dangerous idea, yes, but also a deeply comforting one. The thought that the gods are not watching, not judging your every move, could be a profound liberation. It means you are responsible for your own happiness, right here, right now. You make your entry in the log, author Epicurus. Subject, metaphysics and ethics. Proposes a materialistic, atomistic universe. Denies the afterlife and argues for the pursuit of tranquility as the highest good. No, to be shelved in the section of potentially worldview-altering ideas. Handle with care, especially if the head librarian has just returned from the temple. You roll the heavy scroll closed, the sound deep and satisfying. You have cataloged logic, superstition, and now a philosophy that seeks to dismantle both. The Great Library, you are beginning to understand, is not a silent place. It is a house of 1,000 arguments, all happening at once, whispered from the fragile pages of the scrolls you hold in your hands. You set the Epicurus scroll aside and turn your attention back to the trolley. The next item is not a single grand work of philosophy, but a collection of smaller, more practical scrolls bundled together for cataloging. These are from the new acquisitions shelf, works that have recently been copied or repaired within the library's own scriptorium. As you handle them, you decide to focus your next log entry not on the content, but on the physical object itself, the craft of the papyrus scroll. The first one you pick up is a beautiful example. You unroll a small section and hold it up to the light filtering through the high window. The papyrus sheet is a pale, creamy white, made from the pith of the Cyperus papyrus plant that grows in dense thickets along the Nile. You can see the faint, crisscrossing pattern of the fibers. The scribes would lay thin strips of the plant's core side by side, then place another layer on top at a right angle. These two layers were then pressed together, and the natural juices of the plant would act as a glue, bonding them into a single strong sheet. You can feel the slight texture under your fingertips, a testament to the organic, handmade nature of this technology. There are no factories churning these out. Each sheet is a small miracle of human ingenuity. You make a note in your log, object, papyrus scroll. Material, Cyperus papyrus. Construction, laminated sheets, fibers arranged in a horizontal and vertical pattern. The side with the horizontal fibers was the preferred writing surface, as the reed pen would move smoothly along the grain without catching. The reverse side was usually left blank. A frugal scholar, however, might reuse the back of an old scroll for personal notes or drafts, a practice that sometimes infuriated the librarians trying to keep a tidy collection. You can imagine finding a profound treatise on astronomy on one side and a shopping list for figs and cheap wine on the other. A standard scroll was made of 20 of these individual sheets glued together, forming a long roll that was typically around 30 feet in length. You look at the grand scrolls on the highest shelves, works like the histories of Herodotus, and you realize they would have been immense, heavy objects, requiring 2 hands to carry and a large table to unroll. Reading was not a casual, one-handed affair. It was a physical engagement with the text. You had to unroll it with one hand while rolling it up with the other, revealing only a single column of text at a time. It was a process that demanded focus and deliberation. You couldn't just idly flip through to the end to see how it finished. You had to take the journey the author intended. You pick up another scroll from the bundle. This one is older, the papyrus a darker, more brittle yellow. Its edges are slightly frayed. You note the repair work. A small patch of newer, lighter papyrus has been carefully glued over a tear. This was a constant battle in the library, the fight against time and decay. The Egyptian climate was mercifully dry, which is why these fragile documents could survive at all. But humidity, insects, and simple wear and tear were ever-present enemies. The life of a scroll was precarious. This is one of the more peculiar tidbits you've learned. The senior librarians were in a constant, losing battle against a tiny insect they called the bookworm, which would bore holes straight through a rolled-up scroll, destroying whole lines of text in its silent, relentless munching. Historians of the future will debate the exact methods of the library's cataloging system. Did they use a thematic system? An alphabetical one by author? Or something else entirely? As a junior cataloger, you know the truth is a mix of all three, a complex and sometimes confusing system developed over generations. Each scroll had its silly bows, the clay or parchment tag that hung from its end, announcing its title and author. But the true genius was in the Pinax, the great master catalog created by the poet and scholar Callimachus. It was a massive work, a library of the library, listing every significant work, its author, a brief biography, and the first line of the text. It was the great map to this ocean of knowledge, and your own humble log is a tiny tributary feeding into that grand project. You finish your entry on the physical nature of the scrolls. Object exhibits standard wear. Edges show minor fraying. A neat repair has been made to the 7th sheet, saving a passage on the proper care of olive trees. The cedarwood umbilicus has imparted its scent to the papyrus, a pleasant and effective, though likely unintentional insect repellent. You bundle the repaired scrolls back together, ready for them to be returned to their homes on the shelves. You have not just recorded ideas today. You have touched the very bones of this place, the fragile, fibrous skeletons that hold the soul of the ancient world. Your next scroll comes from a special section of the library, a shelf dedicated to the often controversial field of astronomy. The scroll is entitled On the Sizes and Distances, and its author is a man whose name is spoken with a mix of awe and disbelief. Aristarchus of Samos. You've seen his diagrams before, complex webs of triangles and circles that attempt to map the heavens. But you know this scroll is a prelude to his most audacious and to many heretical idea. As you unroll the papyrus, you see the familiar, careful diagrams of the sun, moon, and earth. The mathematics are dense, built upon the solid foundations of Euclid's geometry. Aristarchus was trying to do something that had never been done before, to calculate the size of the sun and moon and their distance from the earth, using nothing but observation and trigonometry. It was an act of breathtaking intellectual ambition. You can imagine him on a rooftop on a clear Alexandrian night, his eye fixed on the heavens, his mind filled with angles and ratios, trying to measure the cosmos with the yardstick of human reason. You begin to log the contents. The scroll details his method. He observed the moon during a lunar eclipse, noting the size of the Earth's shadow as it passed across the lunar surface. He watched the moon at the exact moment of its half-full phase, measuring the angle between the sun and moon in the sky. His calculations, were not perfect. His instruments were simple, just sticks and shadows, really, and his final numbers were off. He concluded the sun was only about 20 times farther away than the moon. The true figure is closer to 400, but the inaccuracy of the result was not the point. The point was the method. It was the belief that the universe was a place of order and predictable geometry, a place that could be understood, not just feared. But this scroll is just the beginning. You know that Aristarchus used these calculations to reach a far more shocking conclusion, one that is only hinted at here but is detailed in another of his works, now sadly lost to all but a few references. You make a special note in your log. This work serves as the mathematical foundation for the author's later, more controversial heliocentric hypothesis. It's a dry academic sentence for an idea that shook the foundations of the ancient world. Based on his calculation that the sun was vastly larger than the earth, Aristarchus made a radical leap of logic. It was absurd, he argued, to think that this enormous, fiery body would revolve around the tiny, insignificant Earth. It was far more logical to assume the opposite, that the Earth, along with all the other planets, revolved around the sun. He proposed a heliocentric model of the universe, a theory so far ahead of its time that it was dismissed by nearly everyone. It was seen as an offense against common sense and piety. Everyone could see the sun rise and set. Everyone could feel the solid, unmoving earth beneath their feet. To suggest otherwise was the talk of a madman. It was like suggesting that fleas were the true masters of the world, and humans were just their convenient, warm-blooded vehicles. Historians still argue why Aristarchus's heliocentric model failed to gain acceptance. Was it the lack of observational evidence? Was it the powerful influence of the more earth-centered philosophies of Plato and Aristotle? Or was it simply too profound a challenge to the human ego? The idea that we are not the center of the universe is a humbling, and for many, a terrifying thought. The theory was largely forgotten, a footnote in the history of thought, and it would be nearly 2,000 years before another astronomer, Copernicus, would revive it. You wonder what it must have been like to be Aristarchus, to hold a truth so vast and so revolutionary in your mind, and to have no one believe you, to watch the world continue to believe in a cosmic model you knew to be wrong. It must have been a profoundly lonely existence. You roll the scroll closed, its geometric certainties now feeling like a secret whispered across millennia. You can almost feel the quiet, stubborn confidence of the man who wrote it. He had seen the universe as it truly was, even if no one else was ready to look. You complete your entry. Author, Aristarchus. Subject, astronomical calculation. A landmark in the application of geometry to cosmology. The conclusions on size and distance are inaccurate, but the methodology is sound. A work of profound, if unappreciated, genius. You place the scroll on the return cart. You have cataloged a truth that the world chose to ignore, a lost argument in the great, ongoing debate of the library. It is a sobering reminder that not all knowledge is embraced. Some ideas are simply too heavy for their time. The next scroll you take from the trolley is wrapped in a plain, unadorned linen cloth, a sign that its contents are considered sensitive. The title on the syllabus is simple and direct, on anatomy. The author is the same man you saw earlier in the courtyard, the well-fed senior scholar Eratosthenes of Chalcedon. This scroll is the fruit of his life's work, and it represents one of the most controversial and ethically fraught areas of research in the entire Musum. As you unroll the scroll, the text is dense and technical, filled with words you have never seen before. Eratosthenes wasn't just observing the body. He was naming it. You see the word retina for the thin tissue at the back of the eye, a word he coined. You see him describe the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, a name he gave it because its length was roughly the breadth of 12 fingers. You are looking at the birth of anatomical language. He is not just a doctor. He is a map maker, and the territory he is charting is the human body itself. You make your first note in the log, your pen scratching in the quiet hall. Author, Eratosthenes. Subject, human anatomy. A foundational text containing numerous neologisms for previously undescribed organs and structures. The scroll is filled with precise, detailed descriptions. He distinguishes between motor and sensory nerves. He describes the beating of the heart with a detail that suggests intense, first-hand observation. He even builds a portable water clock to measure the pulse of his patients, a revolutionary diagnostic tool. This is not the work of a man who is guessing. This is the work of a man who has seen these things with his own eyes. And that is where the controversy lies. You know the rumors that swirl around Eratosthenes and his colleague Erasistratus. The Ptolemaic kings, in their quest for knowledge, had granted them an unprecedented and shocking permission. To advance the science of medicine, they were allowed to perform dissections on human bodies. This was a profound taboo in the Greek world, where the sanctity of the dead was paramount. To cut open a human corpse was seen as an act of desecration. But here, in Alexandria, a city that was at crossroads of cultures and ideas, the old rules were sometimes bent. But the whispers go even further. The most shocking claim, one made by the later Roman writer Celsus, was that Eratosthenes did not just dissect the dead. He was accused of performing vivisections, dissecting living human beings, criminals condemned to death by the state. This is a claim that horrifies and fascinates scholars to this day. You try to imagine it? A man kept alive, his body open to the searching eyes of the anatomist, all in the name of science. The thought sends a cold shiver down your spine. It's a moral line so dark, it feels like it should swallow all the light in the room. Historians still argue fiercely over the truth of these claims. Was Celsus, writing centuries later, repeating a malicious rumor started by Herophilus' rivals? Was it an exaggeration, a misinterpretation of his work? Or did the quest for knowledge in Alexandria truly lead its brightest minds down this dark and terrible path? There is no definitive proof either way. The scroll in your hands is silent on the matter. It speaks of what was seen, but not how. You note that the text describes the hissing sound of air entering the lungs, a detail that feels uncomfortably immediate. This was the dark side of the museum's patronage. The same system that gave scholars the freedom to think also, perhaps, gave them the freedom to commit acts that would have been unthinkable elsewhere. The pursuit of knowledge, you are learning, is not always a pure and noble thing. It can be messy, complicated, and sometimes terrifyingly ruthless. You wonder if the senior scholars, sitting in their comfortable dining hall, ever spoke of this. Or was it a secret they all carried, a shared burden in their privilege cage? You finish your catalog entry, your words feeling heavy and inadequate, a work of unparalleled anatomical detail. The author's first-hand knowledge is evident on every line. The text provides the foundation for nearly all subsequent medical study. Note, the ethical implications of the research methods described within are significant. You roll the scroll closed, the plain linen wrapper feeling like a shroud. You have touched a piece of knowledge born from a place where the line between healing and cruelty may have become terrifyingly blurred. It is a heavy weight to place on the return cart. After the ethical weight of Herophilus' work, the next scroll on your trolley feels blessedly light. It's slender, wrapped in a simple, clean piece of linen. The syllabus attached to it bears a name that needs no introduction: Sophocles. This is not science or philosophy that seeks to explain the world, but art that seeks to capture its soul. You carry it to your desk as if holding a captured bird, something beautiful, fragile, and alive. The title is one you have never encountered in your studies: The Daughters of Phorcys. It is not one of his 7 most famous plays that are performed regularly and studied by every student. This is something rarer. This is a ghost. You unroll the first few feet of the papyrus, your eyes scanning the elegant, professionally scribed Greek. The opening lines belong to the chorus. Their words a haunting invocation to the twilight gods of the sea. What fate is woven from a single thread of sight? You whisper, reading the words aloud in a breath so quiet, it's barely a sound. What truth is spoken from a single borrowed tooth? The world is blind, and we, the sisters, see. You can almost hear the rhythm of the words as they would have been chanted in a great stone amphitheater, the voices of a dozen men rising in unison. The play, you gather from the opening scene, tells the story of the Gree, the 3 ancient sisters who share one eye and one tooth between them. It is a tragedy not of kings and queens, but of monstrous beings touched by a sad, lonely divinity. You can already sense the classic Sophoclean theme, the terrible intersection of divine will and human suffering. As you continue to scan the text, you feel a profound sense of privilege, but it is tinged with an equally profound sadness. You know the truth of this place. Sophocles, the master tragedian, wrote over 120 plays in his lifetime. Here in the Great Library, you have copies of nearly all of them, a staggering collection of poetic genius. And yet, a cold premonition touches you, a whisper from the future that you cannot understand, but can somehow feel. You know, with a certainty that has no logic, that most of these stories will not survive. That one day, the world will know this great man's work from only 7 of his plays. This scroll in your hands, this living, breathing story, will one day be nothing more than a lost title in a dusty catalog. This particular copy is a masterwork. The papyrus is of the highest grade, the ink a deep, unfaded black. This is an official text, a master copy intended for preservation. This brings you to one of the great operational questions of the library. How did it acquire these definitive versions? It wasn't always through simple purchase or donation. Historians will forever debate the exact acquisition methods, but one story is legendary. It is said that your own king, Ptolemy III Euergetes, a man whose thirst for knowledge was matched only by his royal audacity, devised a brilliant and ruthless plan. He persuaded the city of Athens to loan the library their official state copies of the tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, so that your scribes could make copies. The Athenians, protective of their cultural treasures, demanded a massive deposit as surety for their returned 15 talents of silver, an astronomical sum. Ptolemy agreed without hesitation. The precious original scrolls were sent to Alexandria under heavy guard. And here, in this very scriptorium, the king's scribes set to work, copying the text onto the most expensive, beautiful papyrus money could buy. When the work was done, Ptolemy sent the brand new, luxurious copies back to Athens, and he kept the priceless originals. He willingly forfeited the entire 15 talents of silver, informing the Athenians that the knowledge was worth more than the money. It was perhaps the most expensive library find in history. You look down at the scroll in your hands. Is this one of those very originals, stolen through a magnificent act of royal piracy? It feels like it. It has the weight of an artifact, a piece of history as much as a piece of art. You imagine the Athenian officials were probably furious. But the new copies were so luxurious they could only complain in a very dignified, well-written letter. A letter which inevitably would also end up here in the library. You make your entry. Author, Sophocles. Title, The Daughters of Phorcys. Genre, tragedy. Condition, master copy, likely an Athenian original. A work of immense cultural value. You linger for a moment before rolling it shut. You are holding a voice that will one day fall silent. For now, in this quiet hall, it still speaks. You roll the ghost back into its tomb of papyrus, a soft crinkling sound like a final whispered sigh. You place the Sophocles scroll gently on the return cart, its silence feeling heavier than any words. The next scroll you reach for is different yet again. It is not wrapped in fine linen or tied with dyed leather. It is crudely rolled, bound with a piece of rough twine, and it feels slightly cool and damp to the touch. When you lift it, it carries the faint, unmistakable scent of sea salt and damp wood. This is a recent arrival, and not a voluntary one. This scroll was not donated or purchased. It was seized. This is the other side of the library's legendary acquisition policy. A method far less noble than the clever deception used to acquire the Athenian tragedies. Under the decree of Ptolemy III, every single ship that docked in the great harbor of Alexandria was subject to search. Not for contraband or weapons, but for books. Any scroll found aboard, whether it was a merchant's personal copy of Homer, a captain's log, or a passenger's collection of poems, was confiscated. It was brought here to the library, where the scribes would create a copy. The original was kept for the library's collection, and the fresh copy, marked politely as "from the ships," was returned to the bewildered owner. You carry the damp scroll to your desk, It feels like holding stolen goods, which in a way it is. This policy was a testament to the kingdom's absolute commitment to its mission to possess a copy of every book in the world. It was a magnificent, audacious goal, but you can't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the traveler who lost their book. You imagine a scholar from Rhodes sailing to Alexandria for the first time, his excitement mounting, only to have his most treasured possession, a gift from his own teacher, perhaps unceremoniously taken from him by a grim-faced customs official. He would get it back eventually, but it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be his. You carefully untie the rough twine and begin to unroll the papyrus. It is not a great work of philosophy or a lost tragedy. The script is simple, almost rustic. It is a collection of folk songs and local histories from a small, unnamed island in the Cyclades. There are songs about fishing, tales of village heroes, and remedies for common ailments using local herbs. This is not a text intended for the great scholars of the world. This was a piece of someone's home, a repository of a culture so small and remote it might not exist anywhere else in written form. And now it belongs to Alexandria. The policy was brilliant in its ruthlessness. It turned the city's thriving port into a giant net, catching knowledge from every corner of the Mediterranean. No one was exempt. You've heard a funny, if cynical, story from one of the senior librarians, seasoned sea captains, who traded regularly with Alexandria, had learned to leave their personal books at home. They'd rather face a storm without their favorite comforting epic poem than face the polite, implacable cultural thieves of the Ptolemaic customs office. It was a choice between potential shipwreck and certain confiscation. Historians will likely debate the true value of this collection method. Did it truly unearth countless lost gems of literature and science? Or did it mostly just fill the library storerooms with endless duplicate copies of the Iliad and the Odyssey? You suspect the truth is somewhere in the middle. For every 10 mundane shipping ledgers and third-rate collections of love poetry, the library might find one text like this, a fragile, unique voice that would otherwise have been lost to time. The price of that preservation was a constant, simmering resentment from the rest of the trading world. That the Ptolemies, you realize, were not overly concerned with being liked. They were concerned with being great. You make your catalog entry, your pen scratching a little more slowly this time. Title: Songs of the Stony Island. Author: anonymous. Genre: folklore and oral history. Condition: papyrus of average quality, still damp from sea air. Acquired via mandatory customs seizure from an unidentified merchant vessel. That last line is the official bureaucratic term for it. It smooths over the reality of the act, turning a personal loss into a state-mandated transaction. You wonder about the anonymous author. Did he sing these songs to his children? Did he write them down by the light of a single oil lamp, hoping to preserve the stories of his people? And what would he think knowing his work now sits here in this marble palace of knowledge, an anonymous entry in a catalog destined to be read by scholars who could not even point to his island on a map? You roll the scroll closed. It still smells of the sea, a world away from the dry, scholarly air of the library. It is a captured story, a song in a cage. You leave the scent of the sea behind and move to a different part of the library. A quiet, well-guarded wing reserved for theology and sacred texts. Here, the light seems softer, the silence deeper. The scroll you are assigned to catalog next is stored not on an open shelf, but within a carved cedar wood chest. It is a sign of immense respect and importance. When you lift it, you notice the umbilicus end caps are not wood, but polished ivory, cool and smooth beneath your fingers. This is a treasure. The title on the syllabus is not in Greek, but in a transliteration from another language, and then a Greek explanation, Torah, nomos, the law. This is a translation, a bridge between two languages and two worlds. As you gently unroll the first column, you see the familiar flowing letters of the Greek alphabet, but the words and names feel foreign, yet resonant. Genesis, Abram, Moses. You're holding a Greek version of the sacred scriptures of the Jewish people, who make up a large and vibrant part of Alexandria's population. This is the legendary Septuagint. Its creation is a story that has become a legend in its own right, a testament to the library's ambition. The tale is told that your great king, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, a man obsessed with possessing every important text, realized his library lacked a proper Greek translation of the Hebrew law. He sent a formal request to the high priest in Jerusalem, who selected 72 elder sikhs from each of the 12 tribes of Israel and sent them to Alexandria. These were men of great learning and wisdom. Upon their arrival, the king did not simply put them in a room together. He wanted to test the divine providence of the work. According to the legend, he isolated them in 72 separate chambers on the island of Pharos, under the shadow of the great lighthouse. Each scholar was given a copy of the original Hebrew text and tasked with producing a Greek translation. For 72 days they labored in solitude, and when the time was up and their individual translations were brought forth and compared, a miracle was revealed. All 72 versions were identical word for word, from the first line of Genesis to the last line of Deuteronomy. It was proof that this was not the work of men alone, but an act of divine inspiration, guided by the hand of God. Of course, there's a more practical, almost mundane side to this grand story, a quirky fact that often gets lost in the talk of miracles. Alexandria was home to one of the largest Jewish communities in the world. After generations of living in a Greek-speaking city, many could no longer read or understand the ancient Hebrew of their ancestors. The Septuagint wasn't just a vanity project for the king's library. It was a vital necessity for the community. It was a way to ensure their sacred stories and laws were not lost to the younger generation. It was a bridge not just between languages, but between the past and the present of a living faith. Historians will, of course, forever argue about the historical accuracy of the miracle of the 72 translators. Was it a pious legend, crafted after the fact to lend divine authority to this new Greek version of the text? Or does it reflect a real state-sponsored translation project, a remarkable feat of collaborative scholarship, with the miraculous details added later, like a coat of gold paint on an already valuable sculpture? The truth, you suspect, is probably a bit of both. The project was real, a monumental undertaking of scholarship. The miracle was a story that affirmed its sacredness. Looking at the elegant Greek script, you realize you are holding something extraordinary. This is a pivotal moment in history, frozen in ink on papyrus. This is where the world of the Hebrew prophets meets the world of the Greek philosophers. This translation would go on to have an influence so profound it is almost impossible to comprehend. It would become the Old Testament for the nascent Christian faith, and through them shape the course of Western civilization for the next 2 millennia. You slowly begin your catalog entry, title, the Septuagint, subject, theology law, a Greek translation of the Hebrew Torah, provenance, produced in Alexandria under royal patronage. You add a final, more personal note. The text is not merely a translation. It is a cultural artifact of the highest order, representing the confluence of Hellenistic and Judeo-Christian thought. Its influence is likely to be considerable. You roll the precious scroll closed, the ivory caps cool in your hands. The library, you understand in this moment, is not just a passive collector of stories that have already been written. Sometimes it is the very place where new stories and new worlds are born. Your day is drawing to a close. The light from the high windows has softened, turning from brilliant gold to a warm, dusty orange. The deep silence of the library is now punctuated by the soft, rhythmic sounds of the evening, the distant call of a street vendor in the city below, the the gentle cooing of doves settling on the roof. You are reshelving a small, unassuming scroll, a minor treatise on agricultural techniques, when something flutters out from its folds and drifts to the marble floor. It is not a part of the scroll itself. It is a small, separate scrap of papyrus, torn and yellowed with age, covered in a faded, spidery handwriting that is clearly not the work of a professional scribe. It is a personal note, a message from the past. You pick it up, your fingers tracing the faint brown ink. It feels like an intrusion, a glimpse into a private moment you were never meant to see, but the pull of curiosity is too strong. To whoever finds this, the note begins, know that I, like Omits, was here. You look at the name. You don't recognize it. He was not a famous scholar or a celebrated poet. He was probably someone like you, a junior librarian who spent his days in the quiet company of scrolls. The note continues. Today, the head librarian, Xenodotus himself, criticized my cataloging of the Homeric epics. He said my notes on the variations between the Chian and the Rhodian versions were sufficient, but lacking in scholarly fire, lacking in fire. I have spent 3 months comparing vowel shifts and the use of the digamma. I have breathed more papyrus dust than air. My dreams are haunted by the wrath of Achilles, and he says I lack fire. Sometimes I think the man's heart is a tightly rolled, unread scroll. You have to suppress a laugh. The note is a small, perfect capsule of scholarly frustration, a complaint whispered across more than a century. Xenodotus was the first head librarian of this great institution, a towering figure in the history of scholarship. He was the one who first divided the Iliad and the Odyssey into the 24 books that are still used today. To the world, he was a genius, a titan. To poor Lycomeds, he was just a demanding boss who didn't appreciate his hard work. It's a strangely comforting thought. Even in this temple of reason and intellect, it seems some things are eternal, demanding bosses and underappreciated employees. The note continues, the tone shifting from frustration to a quiet melancholy. I have been here for 10 years. My youth has faded into these shelves. I came here from Miletus with a head full of dreams. I thought I would write my own epic poem. Instead, I write lists. I correct the work of others. I am a guardian of other men's words, a priest in a silent temple. There is honor in it, I know. But some nights I wonder if my own voice has been lost in the echo of theirs. The words resonate with a painful familiarity. You look around at the vast silent library. It is a place of immense privilege, a sanctuary for the mind, but it is also a place that can consume you. The sheer volume of knowledge, the weight of all the great minds who came before, can be crushing. It is easy to feel small here, insignificant. You too have dreams of writing, of creating something of your own, but the work of the library is endless. There is always another scroll to catalog, another text to repair, another shelf to organize. Historians will likely never know the names of the countless junior librarians, scribes, and assistants who kept this magnificent institution running. They will remember the Ptolemies who funded it, and the great scholars like Xenodotus and Callimachus who led it. But the everyday work, the quiet, thankless labor that formed the bedrock of this place that is largely lost to history. This note in your hand is a rare exception, a tiny, accidental monument to one of those forgotten lives. A quirky human fact buried in the heart of this inhumanly large collection. You read the final line of the note. If you are reading this, I am long gone. My dust is probably mixed with the dust on these scrolls. Do not forget us, you who come after. We, the keepers of the flame. We were here. You fold the small scrap of papyrus carefully and tuck it back into the scroll where you found it. It feels wrong to separate it from its home. It is a part of the scroll's history now, a hidden story within the larger one. You place the scroll back on its shelf, your movements slow and deliberate. For a moment, you are not just a librarian. You are a link in a chain of custodians stretching back through time. You are a keeper of Lycomed's memory, just as he was a keeper of Homer's. The library is not just a collection of texts. It is a collection of lives. As you finish your work for the day, a new sound drifts through the library. It's not the gentle cooing of doves or the distant murmur of the city. It's the hurried, rhythmic clanking of bronze buckets, the sound of men shouting orders in the courtyard below. A nervous energy ripples through the usually placid halls. You see a senior librarian rush past, his face etched with worry. You catch a single word from the shouts outside: fire. Your heart gives a cold, hard lurch. Fire is the ultimate enemy of this place. It is the librarian's waking nightmare, the apocalyptic beast that haunts the edges of every scholarly dream. A single stray spark, a dropped oil lamp, a bolt of lightning from a freak summer storm, that is all it would take to turn this entire universe of knowledge into a column of black smoke and gray ash. This entire building, filled with dry, flammable papyrus, is a perfectly constructed funeral pyre waiting for a flame. You walk to one of the high windows and look down. The fire is not in the library itself, thank the gods. It appears to be down at the harbor, in the warehouses near the docks. A thick plume of smoke is rising into the twilight sky, staining the purple and orange hues with a dirty, ominous gray. The library's own fire brigade, a dedicated team of slaves and city workers, is already at work, not just fighting the blaze at the harbor, but soaking the exterior walls and roof of the library itself, a desperate preventative measure. You feel a wave of relief, but it is quickly followed by a deeper, more profound anxiety. The library might be safe today, but the incident is a stark, terrifying reminder of its fragility. All of this, every word of Euclid's logic, every line of Sophocles' poetry, every secret of Herophilus' anatomy is utterly, terrifyingly perishable. It exists only by the thinnest of chances, protected from oblivion by stone walls and the constant vigilance of its keepers. You look around at the endless rows of scrolls. They seem less like a permanent monument to human achievement, and more like a collection of autumn leaves, beautiful and vibrant, but destined to crumble into dust. This is the great, heartbreaking question that will haunt the legacy of the Great Library forever. What happened to it? How did this unrivaled collection of knowledge vanish from the face of the earth? Historians will argue about this for centuries, their debates as heated as the fires that may or may not have caused its destruction. There is no single, simple answer. The popular story, the one that will be told in classrooms and retold in films, blames a single, cataclysmic event. Many will point to Julius Caesar, whose fire in the Alexandrian harbor during his civil war in 48 B may have spread to the library, burning a significant portion of its collection. It's a dramatic, tragic image, the ambition of one man accidentally incinerating the collective wisdom of humanity. But the truth, you suspect, is likely less dramatic and far more tragic. The destruction was probably not a single event, but a long, slow, painful decline. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. A quirky, lesser-known fact is that funding for the Musam waxed and waned with the fortunes of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Later rulers, less enlightened than the first Ptolemies, sometimes saw the scholars as a luxury, cutting their stipends and neglecting the upkeep of the library. Political purges saw scholars expelled, their work discontinued. A slow, creeping decay may have set in long before any fire. Then there were the later conflicts. The city was besieged and sacked multiple times during the Roman and Byzantine periods. With each conflict, parts of the collection were likely destroyed, looted, or simply neglected and left to rot. A religious element enters the story as well. In the 4th century AD, as Christianity became the dominant force in the empire, pagan temples and institutions were targeted. In 391 AD, the Serapeum, a sister library or a daughter library to the main institution, was destroyed by a Christian mob. How many thousands of scrolls were lost in that single act of pious vandalism? The number is impossible to know. You turn from the window, the smell of distant smoke still sharp in the air. The library did not likely die in a single glorious blaze. It probably bled out slowly over centuries. Its death was not a tragedy in one act, but a long, drawn-out story of budget cuts, political instability, war, and religious intolerance. It is a far more mundane, and therefore far more heartbreaking end. It suggests that knowledge is not just vulnerable to flames, but to the slow, steady erosion of human folly. You look at the scroll in your hand, its fragile papyrus a testament to this truth. You are not just fighting fire. You are fighting time and politics, and the slow, inevitable creep of human negligence. It is a battle, with a sudden, chilling certainty that your successors are destined to lose. The commotion from the fire in the harbor eventually subsides, replaced by the deep, familiar silence of the library at night. The air still carries a faint, acrid tang of smoke, a ghostly reminder of the evening's panic. A few oil lamps have been lit in the main corridors, their small, flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows that make the rows of scrolls look like silent, waiting armies. You have been granted permission to stay late, to finish the cataloging of a small, final bundle of scrolls that were overlooked in the day's work. You sit at your small wooden desk, the single lamp beside you creating a small island of warm, golden light in the vast, dark ocean of the library. You reach for the last scroll in the bundle. It is slender and feels strangely light. There is no formal syllabus attached, only a simple folded piece of papyrus tucked into its binding. You open the note. It is not a title, but a single handwritten line from the scribe, unfinished at the author's passing. You feel a quiet reverence as you untie the scroll. You are about to read the last words of a life, a thought interrupted by the ultimate deadline. You unroll the papyrus. It is a poem. The handwriting is beautiful, but it grows weaker, more unsteady as the text progresses. The poem is titled Elegy for a Sparrow, and it is a simple, heartbreaking lament for a lost pet. The poet, a woman named Irina from the small island of Tellus, describes the bird's life with a tender, aching detail. She writes of its tiny, hopping feet on the stone floor, of the way it would peck at figs from her own hand, and of its small, insistent song that filled the morning. The poem is not a grand epic. It is a small, perfect jewel of personal grief. It speaks to a universal sorrow, the pain of loving something small and fragile and then losing it. You read on, your whisper, the only sound in the great sleeping library. The poem describes the sparrow's sickness, its fluttering breath, a tiny, failing flag, and the poet's own desperate, helpless watchfulness. It is a portrait of love and impending loss, so intimate and so raw that you feel as if you are in the room with her, sharing her vigil. Then you reach the end. But it is not a true end. The last stanza is only half formed. The final line trails off into a series of weak, faltering strokes, as if the poet's hand could no longer hold the pen. The last legible words are, "And in the silence where your song once," the sentence is left hanging, unfinished, a doorway into a silence from which the author never returned. You stare at the unfinished line. The silence that follows it is no longer just the absence of words. It is the silence of a life cut short. This is not the grand historical tragedy of a lost library. It is the small, personal tragedy of a single lost voice. This poem is one of the more peculiar and poignant kinds of artifacts the library holds. The unfinished thought, the story without an end. It is a testament to the fact that not all knowledge is lost to fire or war. Some is simply lost to the natural, inevitable decay of human life. You think of the poet, Irina. Historians will know very little about her. They will debate her existence, her dates, the authenticity of her work. Some will say she was a contemporary of Sappho, a brilliant young prodigy who died at the age of 19. This unfinished poem, fragile and fleeting, as the life of the sparrow it describes, may be all that is left of her. A single broken song. Holding this scroll, you realize that the library is not just a collection of finished masterpieces. It is also a graveyard of intentions, a repository of beautiful beginnings that never reached their conclusions. For every complete epic, there are 100 unfinished poems. For every comprehensive history, 1,000 half-written letters. The library preserves not just the triumphs of the human mind, but its fragile, beautiful failures as well. You make your final entry for the night. Author, Irina of Telos. Title, Elegy for a Sparrow. Genre, lyric poetry. Condition, unfinished. The text ends mid-sentence, the scribe's hand failing. You pause, then add one more line. A work of profound and heartbreaking beauty. Its incompletion is itself a part of its power. You carefully roll the scroll closed as if tucking a child into bed. You place it on the return cart where it will wait for the morning. The poem is a ghost, a whisper of a life that was. And you, in this quiet, lamplit moment, have become its witness. You have listened to its broken song, and in the great, silent catalog of your mind, you have marked it down, ensuring it will not be entirely forgotten. The lamp on your desk begins to sputter, its small flame dancing a final weary dance. The moon is high now, a silver disk in the dark Egyptian sky, its light too faint to penetrate the deep shadows of the library. Your long day, and your even longer night, is finally at an end. There is only one scroll left on the trolley, the very last one you must catalog before you can seek the comfort of your own bed. You reach for it. The papyrus is smooth and cool, the scroll itself perfectly balanced in your hands. The title on the syllabus is simple, calming, and strangely appropriate for this late hour, Piri Hypnu. On sleep, the author is listed only as a physician of the Musom, one of the anonymous scholars whose work was dedicated not to fame, but to the quiet pursuit of understanding. You unroll the scroll, the soft crinkling sound a gentle lullaby in the profound stillness. This is not a text on the interpretation of dreams, like the one you catalogued earlier. This is a scientific and philosophical inquiry into the nature of sleep itself. What is it? Why do we need it? What happens to the mind when it drifts away from the world of waking? The text begins by dismissing the older mythological explanations of sleep. Sleep, the author argues, is not a gift or a curse from the gods. It is not a brief journey to the underworld, as the poets often describe it. It is a natural, biological process, a necessary state of rest for the body and the mind. The soul does not depart the body in sleep, you read softly, but rather it quiets its own house, so that the servants of the flesh may make their repairs. It's a beautiful, simple metaphor. The body is a house, and sleep is the time for its quiet, diligent upkeep. The scroll goes on to describe different kinds of sleep. There is the deep, dreamless slumber that follows a day of hard labor. There is the light, fitful sleep of the anxious or the ill. And there is the restorative sleep of the scholar, a state which the author claims is essential for clear thinking and the retention of knowledge. To rob a man of his sleep, he writes, is to rob him of his reason. You can't help but agree, your own eyelids feeling as heavy as damp clay. The scroll offers practical advice for achieving this restorative sleep. It recommends a cool, quiet room, the avoidance of heavy meals before bed, and the drinking of a warm herbal infusion, a mix of chamomile and lavender, herbs that still grow in the gardens of the Musom. It even suggests a form of mental exercise. Before sleeping, one should gently review the day's events, not with judgment or anxiety, but with a simple, detached acceptance. Let the thoughts of the day settle like dust, the author advises, so the floor of the mind may be swept clean for the morning. This is a text of profound and gentle wisdom. It is a work of science, but it reads like a work of kindness. It is a physician's attempt not just to understand the body, but to care for the person within it. In a world full of anxieties, of demanding bosses, of political intrigue, of the ever-present threat of fire, this scroll is an offering of peace, a prescription for tranquility. Historians will note that while much of ancient medicine focused on dramatic interventions and potent, often toxic, remedies, there was also this quieter tradition, a focus on diet, lifestyle, and mental peace as the true foundation of health. This scroll is a perfect example of that gentle, holistic approach. You make your final log entry, your handwriting slow and careful in the dying light of the lamp. Author, anonymous physician. Title, On Sleep. Subject, medicine, philosophy. A rational inquiry into the nature and necessity of sleep. Contains practical advice for achieving restful slumber. A work of quiet and humane wisdom. You add a final personal thought. Its recommendations are sound. I shall endeavor to follow them myself, beginning immediately. You roll the scroll close for the last time tonight. The sound is a soft final sigh. Your work is done. You have walked through the hushed halls of this great institution, not as a king or a conqueror, but as a quiet keeper of its treasures. You have touched the logic of Euclid and the fears of a king. You have held a lost play and a captured song. You have listened to the whispers of a forgotten librarian and the broken elegy of a dying poet. You have been a guardian of the flame, a priest in a silent temple. Now, it is time for you too to rest. You look out the high window one last time. The stars over Alexandria are brilliant and clear, a vast, unread library of their own. The city is asleep. The harbor is quiet. The great library settles into its own deep, dreaming slumber, its countless voices silent for now, waiting for the dawn. And you, the keeper of the scrolls, can finally go home. And now, as your own journey through the great library comes to a gentle close, allow the quiet of this ancient place to settle around you. The echoes of the past grow fainter, softer, carried away on the slow, drifting currents of time. The scent of papyrus and cedarwood begins to fade, replaced by the simple, comforting familiarity of your own quiet room. The weight of the scrolls is lifted from your hands, and the responsibility of the catalog is no longer yours to bear. The endless shelves of knowledge recede into the soft, welcoming darkness, their stories told for another night. Let the silence of the library become your own silence, a deep and peaceful quiet that settles in your mind, smoothing away the edges of the day. There are no more words to read, no more thoughts to chase, only the gentle, rhythmic whisper of your own breath, a slow and steady tide pulling you out into a calm sea of sleep. The fire is distant, the future is unwritten, and all that matters now is this moment of perfect, effortless rest. Let your mind drift, let your body grow heavy, and allow yourself to sink into the deep, restorative slumber that you have so richly earned. The stories will be there in the morning. For now, there is only peace. There is only sleep.